Good morning. My name is Karen Power and I'm the Policy Manager for the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund at the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation. I'm joined by my colleagues Imelda Lampkin and Gerard Land of the DTIF management team here at Enterprise Ireland. Many of you may have been present for the official launch of Call 2 at UL recently and participated in the information session there. And you recall Dermot Mulligan, who's head of the Innovation and Investment Division at the department, gave a presentation on the DTIF. His more detailed slides can be viewed on our webpage, along with the guide for applicants and sample application form. I'm going to give a briefer run through the policy context for the DTIF and the criteria for Call 2. And Imelda and Gerard will then take questions on the application process for Call 2. So as you know, the fund is one of 4 National Development Plan funds confirmed in Project Ireland 2040 in February 2018. The government committed 500 million in funding over 10 years, with over 100 million yet to be allocated in the period to 2022. The fund is implemented through the department with support from Enterprise Ireland, and it's a competitive fund for enterprise co-funded projects. We're seeking to invest in research, development and deployment of disruptive technologies and their application. In setting up the fund, the government has had as its intention to support enterprises in Ireland to exploit enterprise opportunities, to support collaborations with enterprises together and with the public research system, and de-risk that activity, build on Ireland's excellent research capability and leverage it for commercial impact, and to prepare Irish enterprises and our public bodies to engage in European and global partnerships in this space. The government had asked that we use the research priority areas for 2018-2023 to inform the scope of the DTIF when we were designing it. And so, as you recall, they've informed the scope of Call 1 and also they informed the scope of Call 2. And you can see here the 6 themes and priority areas. There are a number of changes between Call 1 and Call 2. We took learnings from some of our experience last year, and they have informed the changes that we have made around the number of partners, the minimum funding request, funding for RPOs, and also the application process. So we now have a minimum of 3 partners, with at least 1 to be an SME and 1 other to be an enterprise partner. The minimum funding request is now 1.5 million. Research performing organisations, and including colleges and research institutes, can get up to 50% funding. And we have a more streamlined application process, removing the expressions of interest stage with now just a 1-stage application process, the deadline of which is September the 18th, giving you a 3-month call period. In Call 2, the selection criteria remain the same. These are detailed on page 8 of the guide, and they are strength of the disruptive technology dimension, economic and market impact, excellence of the overall proposal and approach, and the quality and efficiency of the collaboration, with the first 2 receiving a heavier weighting given their importance for the types of projects that we're trying to fund. And what type of projects are we looking for? Well, the eligibility criteria and selection criteria give a clear view of that, as does the rest of the content in the guide. But just to give you some example or some clearer pointers, we're looking for industry-led projects capable of developing truly disruptive technologies, focused on industrial research. And we're really here wanting all partners to be engaged in industrial research in their own capacity, or working in collaboration together. Projects should be of scale with that minimum funding request of 1.5 million over the 3 years. We want enterprise partners to provide matching funding. And it's very important that collaborations aren't business as usual. So articulate the difference in your proposal when you're submitting your application, and show that it really is different to normal business. We also want meaningful collaborations, those that are will provide enduring benefits for participants. And of course, while many types of participants can be part of collaborative partnership, only clients of our agencies, Enterprise Ireland, IDA, Údarás na Gaeltachta, or eligible research performing organisations can actually draw down funding. As I mentioned, it's important that all collaborators are engaged in industrial research, and that is defined in the guide. it is important that projects demonstrate sufficient novelty. So to give you a flavour of what we mean by industrial research, we've illustrated here the technology readiness levels. So ideally we're expecting projects will fall within TRL levels 3 to 7. It's also important to note that the fund does cover clinical trials, but only up to pilot study. So this is phase 2A, and in line with the EU state aid definition of industrial research. Pre-finance is also allowed for small companies, but applicants must have sufficient non-committed assets to cover the liability and be able to prove that. And early stage companies should be able to prove they have the operational financial capacity to participate in these collaborative partnerships, given the scale and the demands involved. In terms of the process and the timelines, as we said, the closing date for applications is the 18th of September 2019 at 1500 hours, and that's local time, Irish time. Applications will be checked for eligibility, and during the period October to November, we will have international experts review and evaluate the applications received, and then there will be a shortlisting for interview. We hope to announce successful projects by the end of 2019, as we did with Call 1 by the end of the year, and we'll keep you posted on any changes to the process as the months go on. With that in mind, I'd suggest that you follow the department on Twitter. Details are here on the last slide. That's at InterInnov. You can also keep tabs on our webpage, which is debi.gov.ie/DTIF, and of course queries on the application process can be submitted to the Enterprise Ireland mailbox. And I'll now hand you over to Imelda and Jared. Thank you for listening and looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks a million, Karen. We're going to open now to a full and open question and answer session. So it's your opportunity to ask us anything that is a burning issue at the moment. We'll take them as they come, and as you see certain things being answered, if your question is answered, let's keep it to one particular question only, and then move on to another topic. So taking the first one, a question in from Tom. According to the DTIF application criteria, successful applicants must have at least 3 partners, an RPO, an enterprise partner and an SME. Is this correct? And just out of interest, why is an enterprise partner mandatory, and could you give us examples? Absolutely, it's a minimum of 3 partners. One of those partners could be an RPO, but that's not a requirement. With regards to the enterprises, an enterprise partner is any company with an operational base in the state. I guess in terms of examples of enterprise partners, you could take a look at Call 1. You'll see a whole series of enterprise partners there, but typically, we're looking at small, medium enterprises or multinational corporations. And just a point to bear in mind, companies that can be funded under this scheme must be Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland or UDROS client companies. Taking the next question, can I apply for the DTIF as a sole entity? No. When you look through the guide for applicants, you'll see that this is a fund for collaborative research. It's about organisations collaborating together. The consortium must be a minimum of 3 entities to draw down funding. Moving to a question from Kieran. What are the details of the selection stages? Is there an interview stage? Who sits on the selection committees for each selection round? An important aspect of the DTIF is that the evaluators are an international panel of experts. They will review the applications and they'll make recommendations on funding. And yes, there is an interview stage as part of that process. Can an enterprise partner contribute matched funding as an in-kind contribution only, or do they have to contribute cash as well? Enterprise partners can only use cash contribution. It's matched funding. It's not an in-kind activity under this particular fund. So just to be clear on that, the fund is based on incurred costs for which companies can claim subsequent to expenditure. What happens when the innovation comes from a startup, via a startup and not a college? Can we apply? I guess any consortium member can bring innovations to the project, but what we're looking for really is collaboration between those partners. So it's about all partners bringing something to the collaboration that's adding up to a really disruptive project. Can you elaborate on what is industry disruption, and can we clarify what is an enterprise? I suppose we've given a definition of disruptive technology in the guide. We're not really giving more than that. We're looking for technologies that have the potential to disrupt the market. When you read more broadly, you'll see disruptive technologies described as those that can have the potential to change how we live, for example. We're looking for you really to interpret that. And just that point on, can you clarify what is an enterprise? I suppose it's an enterprise. It's a company registered in Ireland. And as I say, across all of those enterprises, the enterprises eligible to get funding through this scheme are Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland and Udaros client companies. Let's see, maybe moving to the next one, a question from Michael. How does projects should target National Strategic Outcome 5, a strong economy supported by enterprise innovation and skills, relate to the refreshed priority areas as seen on slide 5 of the DTIF presentation? I suppose I would look at it as the overarching programme sitting within that national strategic outcome. As you shape your application, that application needs to fit with the refreshed priority areas, which I think fit very closely, and we're just pulling them up here. I think would cover a breadth of areas of relevance to the disruptive technologies. If you've got something that's a bit more specific on what you're questioning there, maybe you could put in another question. Okay, so we have another one. When it is said that the enterprise partners need to provide matching funding, does this mean that the costs need to be evenly distributed between them, or can there be a mix more heavily weighted in one? I suppose the scheme is based on matched funding. There's a 50% funding rate for enterprise partners. Absolutely different companies can have different extent of role within the project, but note that all companies will be 50% grant aided. Moving to the next one. Can you elaborate on financial capacity requirements, and in particular the criteria for the 50% co-funding requirement? So again, I mean, a little bit like the previous question, we're expecting that companies have the financial capacity to participate in the programme, knowing that it's 50% grant aided. That's something that successful applicants will need to go through a very rigorous review of that financial capacity. But it's something that you really should bear in mind at this stage in the application process. Is this something that the company is going to have the financial and operational capacity to take part in prior to committing to a collaboration with multiple partners? So we are a micro enterprise with less than 10 employees. We intend on applying as the SME member of the consortium. Can you confirm that this is allowed? Yes, you can apply, but again, I would say you should bear in mind that you will need to have the financial capacity, the operational capacity to do this project. Okay. I see one of our first questions on when will the editable application form be available. We aim to put a Word document similar to the indicative document that you received for the launch event earlier in June. We will have that available through the website later this week. We will have our online submission system ready by the 1st of September. But for several of you who've asked us questions separately through our mailbox, the primary document that you will submit will be the Word document. And so through that version that we'll provide to you this week, you'll be able to submit it. There are word limits designated in the document. We'll be asking you to submit no more than 50 pages. Anything more than 50 pages will not be sent to the evaluators. We'll be asking you to maintain all of the typical admin requirements, no changes to format. You can submit graphs and diagrams. You can't upload appendices, for example. But all of those, I suppose, are typical administrative things around the call. When we open the online portal, it'll be a very simple portal through a web page, for example. You really will be registering on the portal and submitting the Word document when finalised. And just a reminder that you need to do that prior to or on the 18th of September by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A question, are the slides being shared from today? Absolutely, we'll share the slides from this session and we'll provide the audio recording. Okay, and what way is the finance released? In tranches across 3 years or pre-finance? How? Is it a fixed process or pending spend by the company? So I mentioned earlier that the scheme is based on incurred costs with claims submitted by companies post-incurred costs. At Enterprise Ireland, we operate typically retrospectively with 6 monthly claims. We do have the potential to do pre-finance for companies, and we might talk about that in a little bit more detail in a while. We've been asked, when will the template agreement be available? And by this, I think you're referring to the consortium agreement template. And we've already made that available for information only at this stage. It's available on the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation website. It's there at the moment very much to show you the type of language used around a collaboration like this. For many of you, you're well aware of that. It's not so necessary, but for anybody who's new to this or beginning to look at collaboration for the first time, it gives you an idea of how you would need to work with your partners, what you would need to agree with them, who would develop intellectual property, how would you share ownership, for example. So as I say, it's there, it's available, it's for information only at this stage. Successful applicants will have to agree the content of their consortium agreement, co-sign it and have it approved by Enterprise Ireland prior to finalisation of contract. Moving to the next one, are project management costs eligible as direct costs for RPOs? We're aware that the administration costs are not eligible direct costs per page 14, but project management costs are sometimes categorized separately to admin. I'm not sure I understand that exactly, but for example, our RPO funding model is exactly the type of model that we use typically at Enterprise Ireland. And so your funding will be categorized under typically headings of salaries, materials, capital expenditure, etc., with an overhead for your administration costs. You could ask something a little bit more specific if you have an issue with that. The next one, I guess we've addressed already. Does industry contribution need to be in cash or can it be in kind? Is minimum funding level of 1.5 million euros the total project size or just the funding provided by the department? So the minimum 1.5 million euros is the DTIF contribution, it's the grant. Okay, so is the enterprise partner required to make a matched contribution in cash or can it be made by man hours? Again, it's cash contribution. Is there a focus on funding specific areas of innovation, i.e. medtech, climate change, energy efficiency? The call is open to all areas, all that fall within the research priority areas, and you'll see that any or all of those are included. There's no specific focus on any of them. Okay. We are a small company with a disruptive production battery technology. We don't have funding to support all of the project cycle. Can we participate? Again, I think you would need to tease that out. Absolutely with regards to the disruptive nature of the technology, but also with the other criteria of the call. What's the collaboration going to look like? What's the potential economic impact? Does it fit with every one of the criteria of the call? And maybe just a reminder for all applicants that really to stand out in an evaluation process like this, which is highly competitive, you're going to need to demonstrate your fit and your excellence in terms of every one of those criteria. Do we have an upper limit on the fund requested? What is the definition of enterprise? Do you mean private companies? So we don't have an upper limit on the fund requested, and we're very open to seeing projects that are looking for a fund of more than the 1.5 million euros, which is our sort of baseline. I think we've dealt with that. What is the definition of enterprise? Do you mean private companies? So maybe just if that's not clear enough, we're looking for company participation. The companies should be registered in Ireland. They could be relatively young, right through to very established multinationals. But to get funding from the DTIF, those companies must be Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland or UDEROS client companies. So I think for anybody who's looking at this and has question marks, perhaps you're thinking of registering a new company, take a look at, for example, the Enterprise Ireland or IDA Ireland websites. Take a look at what the companies are like there, their level of development, for example. If you're looking at registering a company for the first time, a point I would make to you is that while this scheme is open to potential client companies, you would need to approach the relevant agency to become a client company if that's something of interest to you. We will not do that through the DTIF and the DTIF application process, for example. You should go through normal procedures. So you can see the entry point on the Enterprise Ireland website if you're a young company or looking at a startup, for example. And you can see an equivalent starting point through the IDA website. If, for example, you're an international company looking to establish a presence in Ireland, and we would advise that if you are looking to do something like that, that you would do it at a very early stage during your interest in the DTIF. The next question there, please clarify the depreciation requirements for both enterprise partners and RPOs in the context of prototype systems, an integral aspect of industrial research. These would not have value outside of the project life and are normally decommissioned. What is the process to get approval for depreciation over 36 months? So I suppose the sort of top line for RPOs, 100% of capital costs will be covered, and that's 100% depreciation. For companies, it will be in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles and EI policy. And we've given you a number of comments, points around that depreciation in the guide for applicants. But just a reminder, in general, in any industrial research project, we would expect that capital costs would be a small part of the overall costs of the project. Moving to the next one, can local authorities be considered a partner if they have two other partners? I suppose looking at that, the local authorities cannot be funded through the fund, and maybe I'll make that point a little bit more broadly. Public bodies in general cannot be funded through the fund. So we're looking at a minimum of 3 partners drawing down funding, and then of course local authorities or any other types of public bodies could be a part of the consortium, making it a slightly larger consortium. So a question from Aidan. There is no reference to PhD stipends or fees in the call documentation. Will these costs be eligible once again in the 2019 DTIF call? If so, will there be any caps on EI funding of PhD fees and stipends? I suppose a point that we would make on that one is that, you know, this is not an ideal training ground for PhDs, for example, but they could be supported in limited cases. Moving to the next one, will the assessors be domain experts? At what level should we pitch the technical explanation of the innovation? Yes, they will be domain experts, and typically in an expert panel of perhaps 3 evaluators looking at your proposal, 2 should be domain experts and 1 perhaps more commercial market focused. And do all of the consortia have to be agency clients or only a subset? To draw down funding, the companies should be agency clients, but you can have other companies in there bringing their own funding. I see one there is a research fellow eligible for an application. Is UL an RPO? Yes, research fellows are eligible to apply. These are research fellows within our academic institutions. We would advise, Ganesh, that you contact your research office to discuss the potential for application and what assistance they can give you. And is UL an RPO? Maybe we're a little bit unclear in our language, but there's a listing of the research performing organisations on the back of the guide for applicants. You'll see that all of our universities are there, all of our institutes of technology, and several other institutions are listed as RPOs there. Can any of the partners be based outside of the Irish state if it is led by an Irish SME? Overseas partners can be a part of these projects, but they cannot get funding. This is to fund institutions and research that's taking place in Ireland. So moving to the next one, the DTIF guidance documents offer ranges for certain cost centres. For example, travel and subsistence for an enterprise partner must be 5% of the salaries budget. Is there an expected percentage of the project costs attributable to capital expenditure to support prototype development and testing as part of industrial research? We don't give a percentage. I think it's not typical in Enterprise Ireland schemes that we would do so, but generally capital should be modest relative to the overall project costs. And so maybe just a broader comment on capital expenditure. Again, I would refer you to the fact that this is an industrial research fund. It's about the funding of research, the people doing that research, the materials for the research, and some capital expenditure. It is absolutely not an infrastructure fund in the way that it's written. Okay.
Do you want to say it anyway?
So the next one, must matched funding be for direct euro spend, or can it be for services provided or credits given by multinationals to get reimbursed for match funding? Basically, there are different types of funds acceptable for match funding or just spend the cash. Again, I think we've answered that one. This is about costs incurred which are claimed for. So we are a medtech SME that would like to include a health economics aspect, as it'll be required to disrupt the existing standard of care. For example, to change clinical pathways and policy. Can we bring a research partner into the consortium to execute on this? Absolutely, I can see the need for the health economics aspect. I think it will depend how you put your collaboration together and how you frame that in the context of the project. What we're really looking for here is collaborative partners, each bringing industrial research capabilities to the party, you might say. And so if one of your partners is not carrying out industrial research, how is that going to fit and how is it going to score against the various different criteria? I suppose I would ask with regards to your project, and how will that compete in a very competitive environment, standing up against some other projects? So you mentioned a panel of international experts who will be performing the evaluation. Are the names of the panel members, an anonymised description of their backgrounds and areas of expertise going to be made available? And no, none of this information will be available. It's fully anonymous. So a question from Connor: can one of the partners remain outside of the DTIF, i.e. one of the three is not eligible for funding but is willing to partner? We're generally looking for 3 partners who are drawing down funding as a minimum. Other partners can take part looking for funding, or in some cases not looking for funding, as the case may be. So in summary budget tables for both enterprise partners and RPOs, please clarify what value should be entered for capital expenditure, i.e. should this read real costs, invoice values, or eligible costs, allowable value of capital expenditure based on approved depreciation terms. So it should be the actual cost invoiced. Will all of the partners be required to attend the interview, or will it just be the lead partner? What will be the format of the interview? commercial pitch, etc. That's something that we'll specify later. I think for us it's very dependent on the number of applications received and how we would go about it. But just for information with regards to last year's call, we looked for all of the partners to attend the interview, and I think it was a very important part of it where the evaluators could get a very real feeling for whether this was a team who had come together to very capably collaborate or not, as the case may be. For industry contribution are salary costs of engineers assigned to the project from the partner companies eligible as a project cost?
Yes.
Yes. Do all SMEs enterprises need to be EI, IDA client companies, or only one has to be? Again, to get funding through DTIF, the companies must be client companies. So all of the companies, but again, going back to the point that you could bring others who are not looking for funding. Does the fund give any split as regards available allocated funds under different themes as per the priorities? No. It's a fully open competitive call, very dependent on what comes in. Do you have any restriction on the applicants from Irish universities as partners? For example, is it required that the applicant should be on a permanent contract, like a professor, senior lecturer? No, we don't give any specific requirement. Yeah, it's related to the institution and how they operate. Again, you should contact your research office within your home institution to look at these things. Will there be future DTIF calls based on specific priority research areas like energy, climate action and sustainability? I would say we're expecting future calls. We're expecting them on an annual basis. And whether they become more specific to particular areas remains to be seen. I think last year we had a first call very much giving us a feeling for what was out there, what the level of interest was. We've kept this call fully open in terms of those areas, and we'll take it from there. But I would say we're delighted to see the level of demand, and I think we should have mentioned at the start that we've about 300 people on the Q&A today. Maybe just as an aside, we've had a number of people asking us, is there a partner search facility? That's not something that we have very formally offered, but there is a LinkedIn group which was established as part of the call launch activity in June. It's still running, and there are a number of partner search activities there, and you could go back into that, take a look, and we can provide the link again on the website. If you do want to look for partners, you could put your information up there. Okay, so if an enterprise partner is a named partner on 2 applications, example engineering services enterprise, does that disadvantage the application? No, I guess. Yes, I think absolutely. The company would need to have the capacity to do that and be able to show that. Where can I find the application form? So again, we will put a Word document online on the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation website this week. But for now, you can see the indicative form. Can the SME or enterprise partner qualify for R&D tax credits for their 50% matched funding contribution? Yes, I think that's a question for yourselves with your accountant internally in the company. Do all enterprise partners need to be Irish, or is it sufficient to have one, for example, Enterprise Ireland registered entity as the lead applicant? So maybe we're not being clear enough. We're looking for a minimum of 3 partners. Of the companies in the collaboration, one must be an SME and one other. And only Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland and Údarás na Gaeltachta clients are eligible to get funding. So yes, the companies must be Irish, and if looking for funding, those companies must be clients. For RPOs, are the costs of staff on academic salary scales for time spent on the project eligible? If wholly necessary for the completion of the project, which is our interpretation from the RPO cost section. Yes, the staff cost must be related to the project contribution. Yeah, will there be a defined document detailing eligible and ineligible costs? I think we've given you as much detail as we're going to give you for now in the guide for applicants. For us, I think we felt it was pretty heavy this time round, which was, you know, very much a change from where we were with call 1. So if you do have further questions, keep putting them in here through the webinar, and for administrative issues you can contact us through our mailbox. Okay, I received the following response from DTIF to an email I sent. As per the criteria you cite below, only clients of those agencies and eligible RPOs can draw down funding in call 2. ESB networks could participate but not draw down funding as that entity does not have client status with any of our agencies, nor is it an eligible RPO. My question is, why wouldn't ESB networks fall under the category of a potential client of Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland or Údarás na Gaeltachta? I think perhaps that's a question we could take offline. But yes, I mean, I would think as a national utility, a public body, that it wouldn't be eligible. But as I say, we'll take it offline and we can talk further. Do the matching funds need to be available up front? In an ideal world, that's what we're looking for. Do in-kind software time commitments qualify as a cost under enterprise partner claims? I'm not sure about that one. But again, I'll just make the point to you. This is not a program that is about in-kind contributions. It's about incurred costs that are subsequently claimed. Maybe just around the matching funding being available up front, maybe it's the time just to mention pre-finance. There is an opportunity for companies, for small companies, to apply for pre-finance for these particular projects, with the idea being that for some of these companies it can be hard to get the projects up and running. It's something that the actual mechanism for pre-finance, the amount of information required, will be defined a little bit further. I think primarily at the stage of successful applicants, where we're looking at financial and operational capacity. If a company has an existing grant covering a portion of work that is now becoming part of a new DTIF application, does this impact upon the application?
It's already started, can't be funded.
Yeah, exactly. So a project that's already underway can't be funded. And maybe just again a broader point around that. 50% grant aid requires 50% funding to match. That funding can't come from other grants, whether national or EU grants.
10%.
Is there a minimum percentage of the overall budget of the project that must be allocated to the SME partners? For call 2, we've put in a minimum of 10% to all partners. I suppose it's just to make the point that we're looking for all partners carrying out industrial research in a very integrated research project. We're not looking for one absolutely primary partner with very small activities in several others. Yeah. So I suppose there's a question up there, what qualifies as being a client of Enterprise Ireland? I think, first of all, if you have a new company and you're approaching Enterprise Ireland for the first time, your company is most likely not a client of Enterprise Ireland. We've had people asking us where they take part in an entrepreneurship program, or they take part in something like the Competitive Start Fund, or a commercialization activity within Enterprise Ireland. Are these clients of Enterprise Ireland? But an enterprise client of Enterprise Ireland is a company that has established itself as a startup, entered Enterprise Ireland's High Potential Startup Programme, for example, or is a much more established company that has probably had a long-term relationship with the agency. In all cases, the client should have a development advisor at Enterprise Ireland that they can contact to check their status as a client. Coming back to the man hours question, just want this to be clarified. In Enterprise, are you saying that the time of our internal research clients cannot be claimed? I suppose, again, we've given a pretty detailed amount of information around man hours, salaries being claimed under this particular programme in the guide for documents, and I think I'll refer you there. Can non-European enterprises qualify, enterprise qualify as an enterprise partner? Yes, a non-European enterprise could be a partner, but that company will not be eligible for funding. Okay. Startups tend to be leading the charge in disruptive technology, but how can they finance matching funding for this? I suppose absolutely we acknowledge both aspects. We acknowledge that that's where a lot of the disruptive technologies are coming from, and that there is an issue around finance. I think in our experience in Call 1, we've seen a very mixed profile of startups, particularly around high potential startup companies, some that have actively raised finance and have been able to run with these projects, and others that very clearly need to look at a pre-finance option. Again, I think we would reiterate they must have the operational capacity to collaborate. Is there a requirement for up-to-date management accounts, financial data sheets, etc.? Not at this stage of the application process. For successful applications, we will come back looking for very detailed information, typical of what would be asked for with many of the Enterprise Ireland schemes, but only for the successful applicants. Will the Word document to become available provide a template re what each section needs to address? The PDF is as is at the moment, looks more like a guide. Read the selection criteria for reviewers. I mean, it will be more clearly a template, but it won't have any further text descriptions in it. Okay, so I think maybe there's some difficulty around salaries in companies. So salary costs are eligible for companies, and I guess on page 12 of the guide, we've given you a series of points there around exactly what those costs are. So we'll leave it for now. And again, yeah, given that capital costs will be a small component, most of the costs will be salaries. Are such costs allowed? Yes. Will there be a call 3? Yes, and as I say, we're expecting this call on an annual basis. We're hoping to use an RPO based project management unit to look after the delivery and reporting. Should this cost be under consultancy? I think that's very much how that project management unit is positioned within the research performing organisation. If it's RPO costs costed within the RPO, I would think that it's covered as part of the RPO activity. If it's something different, which is some kind of a standalone project management unit operating as a company, I think it's a little bit different. After 30 years in aviation, I founded a disruptive startup in blockchain for aviation based in Dubai and Malta. I have a number of partners who wish to collaborate on a disruptive solution project, all based in Ireland, including an SME supported by EI. Can we apply under this scheme? Again, I would go back to the point that you're looking for a collaboration of a minimum of 3 partners. Those partners looking for funding under the particular fund. If there's a startup based in Dubai or Malta taking part, as a 4th or more partner without funding, you could do that. In the matched funding from companies, what is the minimum that they have to contribute in terms of cash? So I suppose again it's 50% funding, and I suppose, I mean, in terms of the overall amount of cash for that company, it's very dependent on what your collaboration looks like. What's the scale of activity that the company is committing to? Would you mind clarifying the previous answer that you need the 3 partners to draw out the funding? Is that what that's saying? Would you mind clarifying the previous? You need 3 partners. Yeah. So I suppose our default position is a minimum of 3 partners, and 3 partners drawing down a minimum of 1.5 million euros. What we can't find is that we have a minimum of 3 partners where 1 is in Ireland and 2 are overseas, not drawing down funding, for example. So just a reminder, it's an Ireland-based fund. Research will take place in Ireland, and so the minimum of 3 partners will draw down costs around that research activity happening in the country. Would you provide feedback on applications before the review if we send them early? No, that's not something offered. There's an interesting one here. Is it possible to include optionality in the scope of a project? For example, if a discrete work package is identified as optional and it is identified by the examiners as being not critical to the project, can these be removed from the scope? I'm not so sure that I'm qualified to answer it today, but I suppose a point I would make is that we're expecting the call to be highly competitive if it's anything like call 1. And the clearer your intentions are in what your collaboration is going to do for the scale of the project you're aiming for, the more likely that the evaluators are going to be comfortable with what they're recommending around your project. So personally, I would think you're aiming for as much certainty as possible. You said that the public organisations are not allowed to be funded partners in relation to the question on local authorities. Is this the same for RPOs, or can they be a funded partner? So again, we've provided the listing of RPOs at the back of the guide. Researchers in all of those RPOs are eligible for funding under the scheme, and actually they're eligible for 100% grant aid. Any advice re RPO versus enterprise partner being the lead partner, and what will typically be viewed more favorably by evaluators? So we've specified in the guide that this is a fund that is focused on industrial research. Anything that's suggestive of leadership by the industries, commitment by the industries would be very favourably looked upon. But yes, an RPO can lead a project. Really, it's about making the case for this project, who's doing what and why. Would you prefer a new, would you prefer a new idea that has not been implemented yet, or a product that was trialed in a different market and will be further developed into one of the priority areas? I suppose this fund is positioned as a disruptive technologies fund. It's about disrupting the market. It's about new, innovative, exciting, agile projects. And really, that's what you're going to have to show to the evaluators in your application. So I think anything that is suggestive of an incremental step from something that's already in existence, you know, you'll really have to make your case for something like that. We're a startup company to lead the application, currently thinking to have 2 partners. One is a university partner in Ireland, the other is overseas. Are we eligible for the criteria of partners? Yes, so I suppose yes. So a question, I suppose, is the company itself Irish, looking to lead the application? We're recommending that you would be looking for the minimum of 3 partners looking for funding from this fund. Will it cover clinical work done in the US or Europe? Potentially, yes. We've seen it in Call 1, where we have a number of projects with clinical trials being covered, for example. Those clinical trials are phase 1 and up to phase 2A, typically allowable. Can a large company enlist multiple partners over the course of the 3-year program? No. I suppose it's a no. We're looking for evidence of the applicants in this application by this deadline. Is the budget increased on the previous call, and how many projects are expected to be funded? Yep, so exactly. So I suppose we had commitment from the department of 100 million to 2022. We had 20 million for the first call, potentially 30 million for the second, and onwards and upwards. So yes, in terms of number of projects, it's very dependent on what gets through and what the scale of the projects is. As an example, if I apply for 1.5 million as the lead RPO, are the bulk of the funds allowed to go to cover RPO research staff salaries without a cash contribution? I'm not so sure I understand that as a question, but one important change for this particular call was that the funding of an RPO can't be more than 50% of the fund requested. Yes, so the other minimum of 2 parties would be contributing cash. How many submissions were received for call 1? How many applicants were successful? Yeah. And what made the difference between the successful and unsuccessful applications? So I think typical of a first call, I think many of you are aware that we had over 300 expressions of interest. We had 27 successful projects with 104 successful applicant organisations across the 27. In terms of what made the difference between the successful and unsuccessful, those that clearly showed the evaluators the disruptive nature of the technology, the potential for economic impact, and that the team was strong, the collaboration and the excellence around that. I think they were the ones that made it through. Okay. How many successful RPO-led applications were there in call 1? I think of the 27 that were successful, you'll see that actually the pattern of applications that came in was very much similar to that. So primarily SME-led, a small number multinational-led, and probably nearly a third RPO-led. We're going to take just a couple more questions, and for those that we have that haven't been answered as yet, maybe we'll put a note up on the website, but I'm conscious of time and that we wanted to allocate enough to get you going on your applications, but not too much so that people can't stay online. Does each partner have to demonstrate that they are carrying out industrial research, or for example, can one partner contribute as a service provider to another partner developing the disruptive technology? I would say the take-home message is we're looking for an industrial research collaboration with all partners carrying out industrial research, and there is no service provider to another partner allowable. Okay, so maybe we'll take one more, and that's to support projects. It is likely that the Tier 1 partners will need additional support from qualified companies in Ireland and abroad to design and build test equipment. Should these contractors and their importance in the project be named in the application? I would say yes, where known. Anything that shows how well thought out the proposal is and really gives an understanding of who's doing what would be a very good thing. Okay, so we're going to leave it at that for today. We will have a recording of the webinar on the DTIF webpage tomorrow. So that's the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation webpage. And as I say, if there are any outstanding questions, we'll take them, we'll put some information there. And for any administrative queries over the next few weeks as you're working through your applications, you have our mailbox address. One other shout out I wanted to give while we're online today, at Enterprise Ireland we've a new Twitter account which is @DisruptiveEI, and we'd like to use it to establish the disruptive technologies community, the day-to-day activities that are going on, and to show you successes and project examples and things like that as we go. So for any of you who use Twitter actively, we'd love if you'd follow us online. Thanks for your time today, and very good luck with your application.